Welcome, freedom-loving Canadians across the land. It's Major Russ Cooper once again with another session of In Hot, our interview series that discusses topics of the day that are relevant to our Charter rights and freedoms, which is one of our main considerations as Canadian citizens for Charter rights and freedoms. And today we're going to look into do a bit of a deep dive into an emerging controversy surrounding the euthanasia laws of the land. Canada, at this point in time, looks like it has or is about to have the most permissive assisted suicide euthanasia laws in the world. And there are a lot of people around the globe who are looking at our laws saying, wow, this is getting pretty crazy here. And maybe it's something that we don't want to replicate in our country. It's getting that kind of attention. Now, today to help us, we have a superb wingman in the form of Alex Schadenberg. Alex is a longtime executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. He has been the executive director since 1999. He is also the international chairperson of that organization ever since 2007. He has articles published in newspapers worldwide and has the world's most widely read blog on issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide. Alex has become known as the definitive source of information on issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide, as seen in his book entitled Exposing Vulnerable People to Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide, a recommended read. He is currently working on another book featuring the best articles on euthanasia and assisted suicide.
But it was published actually, but that's fine.
It is published. It has already been published, so you can already be on the lookout for that. Alex is a renowned speaker and has spoken throughout Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, Switzerland, Belgium, and Italy. He's debated euthanasia enthusiasts around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to put it over to Alex and ask the initial question. Alex, you've obviously got fire in your belly for this topic, and I just got to ask you, how did that come about? What is motivating you to do what you're doing with on this file?
Well, Russ, you may remember the case of Robert Latimer in 1993, who killed his daughter Tracy. She had cerebral palsy. She had a significant case of cerebral palsy, but there was a lot of how would you say missed story to the whole thing, because she certainly wasn't a dying girl. She was certainly not suffering as he had explained to the world and as the media had sort of lapped up. And why do I say that? Well, if you go back to the court proceedings, there was two main Robert Latimer trials. And if you go back to the court proceedings, you'd realize that what I'm saying is actually the truth. And what Robert was saying was based on his issues that he had with medical treatment and everything. There's a lot of issues that he had, a phobia anyway. But we go on. The fact is that before the second trial, so you might remember he was convicted. He challenged it. It went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they overturned the conviction not based on him not being guilty, but they said they were jury irregularities, and they went to the second trial. In the end, just for your information of your readers, they could do the history of this. They will notice that in the end, that the courts had decided that there actually weren't jury irregularities, that in fact, the protocols of the day were simply followed. Why Robert said there was his lawyers argued there was jury irregularities is they had interviewed the potential jurors ahead of time, which is what was done at the time. It wasn't only this trial. You can go through hundreds of trials and you'll notice that that's exactly what was done all the time. And obviously speaking, the prosecution was trying to find a jury which was more likely to prosecute, and in the same way as the defense would try and find a jury that were more likely not to prosecute, and that's how it was done in those days. So in fact, that's what was decided in the end, as much as the Supreme Court ordered the second trial. Now, here's the thing. Around the time of the second trial, there were some opinion polls that were done, and 37% of Canadians said in this one major opinion poll that they thought what Robert Latimer did was just fine. He was a loving dad. He was salt of the earth farmer. And the fact that he killed his daughter Tracy, well, it was a necessary thing. And, maybe it wasn't the right thing, but it was a necessary thing. And, everything should be just fine. And that to me shocked me. Now, why would that shock me? Well, we had my wife and I, one of our sons is disabled, and we were getting involved in this disability community. So this whole issue started really irking me because I started having a different view of disability. I started viewing disability more in the sense of how people with disabilities experience life and the attitudes towards people with disabilities, not only because you're seeing people, you're going to these meetings, you're going to these events, and there's other families with disabled children, and it all starts coming home to you in a totally different sense of what this actually meant.
Yeah.
And I saw it as a eugenic attitude and a eugenic undertone in Canada. I also felt that there were very few voices at the time. So we're talking around 1997.
Yeah.
So around 1998, the legal structure of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition was set up, and in 1999, I started doing this full time. So that's sort of the long term of it. Now, you're oriented towards freedom. So a lot of people might be thinking, well, what are we talking about euthanasia on a show about freedom? Because, it's been sold to Canadians and to the world around the concept of this is about freedom.
Yeah.
It's your free right to ask to have your life ended. They sell it as a form of suicide, right? They say that your life is then in your control and you can have your life ended. But it's the biggest lie going. It's the flag there's two main flags they wave to promote euthanasia. The first is freedom. They say it's about freedom, choice, and autonomy. Well, it's not about freedom, it's not about choice, and it's not about autonomy. And then they say it's all about ending suffering, and it's all about, caring, true compassionate care to kill somebody, which of course is the second flag they wave, because we all fear pain. We all fear pain. Every single one of us. I fear pain. I have no interest in you going through pain. That's not my interest at all. I'm opposed to killing you. Right. Anyway, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And if you look at how the law works and how the law works in the Netherlands and Belgium and how the law works in Canada, yeah, the law says you must request it. But if you actually read how the law works, the law is all about what the doctor or the nurse practitioner, because in Canada it's doctors and nurse practitioners who can do the act. It's all about the rules they must follow in order to cause your death. That's what the law is about. The law is about doctors and nurse practitioners in Canada causing your death. That's how the law is all designed. And it's a funny thing because it causes a mixture too on top of it, because there's two issues here. It assigns doctors and nurse practitioners to be involved in killing you. And then secondly, it actually is not a medical act, because it's actually what they did in Canada is they created an exception in the criminal code. So it's still in the criminal code as being illegal for me to kill you. But if I'm a doctor or a nurse practitioner and I followed the rules, then I can kill you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works. And you would say, oh, Alex, you've simplified it. I have simplified it a bit. That's obviously true. But the fact of it is that's what it's about. So you say, well, they say, oh, this is all about my freedom. Well, no, it's about a doctor or a nurse practitioner injecting you with lethal drugs to cause your death. That's what the law is about. And you might have requested it, but then we come down to what it means to be human. There's lots of reasons I might ask someone to end my life. And previous to legalizing euthanasia, we would have recognized suicidal ideation and issues around somebody wanting their life ended as a cry out for help, care. They needed someone to get them through this terrible time to the other side. They might need pain and symptom management. They might need psychological support. They might need some drug therapy because they're going through deep depression and they can't seem to get out of that through, how would you say, talk therapy alone. They might need different things, but they did not need to be killed. But then when you legalize euthanasia, suddenly now that becomes the answer to the difficult situation. So the suicidal ideation's always been there. Me or you or someone at a time in our life feeling that we'd like our life to be ended is not new to our human condition. What is new in Canada, which started in 2016, was that the doctor or nurse practitioner can kill you when you're going through those symptoms and those feelings.
Let's just talk about before 2016, Alex. The law seemed to be on the side of, well, maybe a precautionary principle is in order here. Maybe our charter does have a right to life, but converting that into a right to death is maybe a bit of a step. There was the original assessment, Supreme Court assessment on the Sue Rodriguez case.
Yes.
It said no. We can't allow this to stand. It was a close vote, 5-4 vote, but they said no, we can't allow this to stand, and they expressed the the concern that this was wide open for abuse down the road.
Absolutely.
Now, somewhere along the line, we get to 2016, and now we have 9-0 was the court decision, and
In
that
Carter,
legalized. Yeah, that
yeah.
there was no opposition at all, and it seems like there was a sea change that happened over the course of 10, 15 or so years. That what do you see as being responsible for that kind of a sea change moment in our legal system, and turning
I see two
charter upside
factors.
down?
Right. So the first factor in Rodriguez was the fact that the court was correct, and it took the same decision as the Irish court and the U.S. courts and everything, that when you give this sort of reasoning that it's okay to have somebody in law, such as a doctor or a nurse practitioner, causing people's death, that in fact you're going to have some misuse, abuse, things will happen, and you will have some deaths that happen, and that's not acceptable. It's never acceptable. So even if you come to this concept and you say, no, Alex, you're wrong. This is all about my autonomy. I should have the right to ask someone to lethally inject me, and when they inject me, it's about my freedom. It doesn't really work that way, because when is it my freedom when somebody else puts lethal drugs into my blood system? That just doesn't make any sense.
You're involving more than just yourself in that at that point.
Right.
Yes.
It's a philosophical upside down. Nonetheless, that's what people buy into, because we have a lot of fear of a bad death. And so I'm going to get down to that. And so the first court was correct. They said, there's going to be problems with this. You can't just do this. There's no way you can actually regulate this, that there's not going to be abuse of the law. There has been abuse of Canada's law. There's been significant abuse of Canada's law. But what's funny about Canadian law, how we have done our reports. So I'm going to give the Dutch some credit. Every 5 years, the Dutch government have done a serious study into the deaths of people in the Netherlands, and Belgium's done the same thing. And that's where my book came from, Exposing Vulnerable People to Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide, where I went through those studies and those reports, and uncovering who were the ones who the government report identified as dying without request or consent, or deaths that occurred, which were euthanasia deaths that were never reported. Who were the ones? Okay, so I'm going to get into that first. So let's give the Dutch and Belgium some credit that they were willing to do studies to actually examine, is the law being abused? And their studies have, they expose yes, their laws are clearly being abused. So the Dutch studies show, the last Dutch studies show that it was, and I don't have the numbers in front of my face, so I'm sorry about that, but it was a little over 20% of all the euthanasia deaths that were underreported. So you have this underreporting element. Now that's not actually a surprise. There's been some Dutch articles about that, where certain doctors admit that they don't report. In Belgium, the numbers are higher. So the last Belgian report put it somewhere pretty close to 40% of underreporting. So I'm not sure if in 2022 that's still happening, up to 40%. But even the pro-euthanasia people admit that the Belgium data is hard to assess, because there is a very high underreporting rate that is acknowledged. There was actually, interesting enough, a few years ago in a major Belgium newspaper, there was this sort of debate between the guy who runs the Euthanasia Commission and this doctor who does euthanasia. And this doctor was telling the guy who's the head of the Euthanasia Commission, this is debate back and forth in a newspaper, he was saying, I never report the deaths I do. I never report them.
Wow.
And of course, then the guy who's head of the Euthanasia Commission saying, well, the law requires you to, we expect you to report. And he's saying, well, no, I do see it as a form of privacy. So I do euthanasia and I never report. It's just, I've never sent in a report. And I asked the question, well, okay, well, has this doctor even had a slap on the wrist for never sending in a report? He admits it. The head of the commission is hearing this. Was there ever a slap on his wrist? Like I'm talking about, there probably should be more than a slap on the wrist, because you're talking about life and death. Nonetheless, was there ever a slap on his wrist? And the answer is no, never has there been a slap on his wrist. And yet he admits to the media in a big way, to the head of the commission, I've never sent in a report. I believe the doctor who never sends in a report, his name was Cousins. And I'm not sure.
That's just incredible. So we have this, now we have the right to die kind of blossoming into other rights for doctors not to report or not to do this or not to do that.
So if you look at the Canadian reports, and I've done some, so we've only had a few, and now we've never done a study yet, okay, to look at the underreporting problem or the deaths without request or consent issue that would be going on. And in the Netherlands, it showed in the last report there was quite a few hundred deaths without request or consent. The Belgian numbers were a little bit higher in their report. So who are these people? These people tended to be people who were quite elderly, who were in a hospital. It was almost always in a hospital, not always, but almost always. They were people who were possibly nearing death, but it's hard to tell. But they were usually incompetent, and the doctor admits that they did this. They caused their death intentionally by lethal drugs without a request or a consent. So obviously now you're talking about people who probably were in coma, as I say, or incompetent, and they're quite elderly. For some reason they're not dying. So the decision was, well, we will speed this up and end their life. The other point was that sometimes a family member did urge the doctor to do so, but not always. Now, when you look at this, this is a serious thing that's happening because they're using lethal drugs intentionally to cause death. Now, how do they find out this information in these reports? So the Dutch report, the Belgian report, they do it because they do what you call a blind study. So they send out a questionnaire to the doctor about person X. So person X died in whatever year, 2015. And so the doctor who was involved with person X's death receives a report, and they can then fill out what happened in that death, and then they send it in knowing that there's no chance of repercussions legally if anything they did was considered questionable or outside of the law. It's what they call a blind study, so we can't connect person X's death to Dr. Y. And so the doctors are freely admitting, yes, one of the questions are, did this person die by lethal drugs? The answer was yes. Did they request it? The answer was no. Then they'd have to describe the conditions. So you're getting in these reports. So I've pointed this out in my book. This is what a lot of the experts said to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada said, well, we have a different culture than the Netherlands or Belgium. So there was a recent article written about that was published, I believe, in the National Post, saying that the courts were warned about this ahead of time.
Yes.
They were told about the Dutch and the Belgium experience. You see, it's interesting because the Canadian Supreme Court came out and said, there's no proof that we're going to have a problem. And the Irish Supreme Court, on a similar case, they came in with the same basic people to hear their positions. They came out with the opposite decision. No, this is going on already in the Netherlands and Belgium with these things happening. You cannot legalize this because there's no way to control it. And that was only a few years ago. So the Canadian decision came down, the Irish decision came down about a year later or so, and they were opposite decisions.
It seems like there's different talk about the Canadian Supreme Court is saying the cultures are different. Maybe
well, part of it
the cultures amongst the people aren't that different. Maybe the cultures in the legal systems are
in my view, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can say this. If I were a lawyer, I'd be afraid of someone slapping me hard for it. I think that they were being very foolish, the Supreme Court, and of course the previous court, which was Justice Smith at the BC Court, the original judge to hear it, because she said the same thing. And I think they were being very foolish because the assumption is that somehow human nature, what makes us human and tick in Canada, is different than somebody in the Netherlands or Belgium, what makes them human and tick.
I think that's
we're very similar.
That'd be a good definition of hubris, I guess. But to make it things even worse, I'm going to share screen here, Alex, and what I would like to do is we have that was the law from 2015, 2016. It has since kind of evolved, and now we have a situation in 2020 where the original underpinnings of euthanasia law in Canada were that death had to be reasonably foreseeable. In 2020, the courts ruled, well, wait a minute, that's not giving everybody their bodily autonomy rights. So they loosened that up, and now that reasonably foreseeable feature of the original legislation is gone, and now you don't have to be close to death's door. You simply have to be in a situation where you have an irreversible downtrend, I guess. But you could be in a situation where you could possibly go on to live for decades. And now we get Now, that
Well,
same legislation.
actually, I think we should go into this for. I was just going to say that there hasn't been a study in Canada, so we don't know what kind of abuse is happening in Canada. But I wanted to conclude that situation first by saying to you that the Quebec reports, because remember, we've got two different laws in Canada. We've got the federal law and the Quebec law. The Quebec report actually does show clear abuse of the law. And this is a serious problem because in Quebec, you have a multiple reporting system, whereas the rest of Canada doesn't have that. So in Quebec, you've got a reporting system by the regions. So the hospitals, et cetera, send in reports, as well as the doctors send in reports. And you got the pharmacy reports, and they look at all these data, and it shows you that there are some doctors who have not reported all their deaths. So it shows you this two different data numbers, and I've written about that there's two different data numbers, but it also shows that there were several deaths in Quebec that were outside of the law. Even with our wide open definitions, they were still outside of the law.
Wow.
So the Quebec report actually does show that, because they actually look at the reports, whereas the federal report that comes out, all it does is look at the data. You know, you were 72 years old, you had cancer, you died on this date, you had they waived your waiting period, or they didn't waive your waiting period, X, Y, Z. There's your data, there's your information, and then you can break it down by provincial, they break it down by health, how would you say, your conditions, and et cetera, and there's your it's only data, it's raw numbers. What does it actually mean? It doesn't really mean anything. So let's go back into this. The original law was a serious problem right from the bat. So the original law passed in 2016 was Bill C-14, and I argued that right from the beginning it was designed to expand. And why? Well, the first thing is it said that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. Natural death has to be reasonably foreseeable. Well, sorry, Russ, I think your natural death is reasonably foreseeable. They did not actually define it. So what did it actually mean? So to one doctor, it might have meant that you had to be terminally ill. So one doctor might have said to you, Russ, you don't qualify for euthanasia, you're not terminally ill. And the next doctor, who maybe it does more euthanasia deaths, has more comfortable because they've gone to a couple of the death with dignity seminars, they know that natural death is reasonably foreseeable, really lacks definition, which is what I was also saying. It lacks definition and meaning. Therefore, they would look at you, Russ, and they say, Russ, you look pretty well ready to go. So I agree, your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, and they would sign you off. So you had this different sort of set of principles in Canada as to who you were going to for euthanasia. And I think also that's one of the reasons why we had huge numbers of euthanasia deaths in Victoria, BC, where we had euthanasia clinics, and compared to, let's say, Newfoundland, where there might have been only one or two doctors willing to do it there. So you get these massive differences in the numbers of percentage of people dying by euthanasia across the country based on how they interpreted the law to be. So Bill C-7 removed that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. But as I said, that never made sense in the first place. What it did do, though, is it gave this green light to the concept of euthanasia for people with chronic conditions, people with disabilities. And the people with disabilities from the beginning fought against euthanasia because they recognized that they were targeted by this type of legislation. And I think they were right. I think they were right on the money. Sadly, that's exactly what's happened. But by Bill C-7 taking away that language. Now, what else did Bill C-7 do, which is important? They said, well, if your natural death doesn't have to be reasonably foreseeable, then how are we going to bring in some sort of safeguard? So they said, well, if your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, still lack definition, you can have an immediate death. So if the doctor says, Russ, it looks like you're dying pretty soon, we don't have to have a waiting period or anything. You can die today, tomorrow, whenever you want. We'll just go ahead and do this. Now, of course, it took a second doctor or a nurse practitioner to agree, but let's be brutally honest about this, okay? There are doctors and nurse practitioners who know each other, and they know who are their allies. They're not about to go contact, how would you say, some guy who goes to church every Sunday to ask them to sign off on the euthanasia report. Because there's a good chance that guy or that gal who's quite a faithful person probably isn't into euthanasia, probably doesn't want to sign off on the document. But they will have their friend who they know who's sort of pro-euthanasia, who might have done a bunch of euthanasia deaths themselves, and they will approve someone. And then the second doctor or nurse practitioner is really a signing authority. They're signing off. They're agreeing that this person would qualify and that everything was done properly. And so it's really a second signature is really what the law requires. It doesn't actually require the second doctor or nurse practitioner to examine you. right? And that's what's very important. So they would look at the medical record and say, yes, I think you're right, sign off, boom, 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 done. So let's get down to it. You could die the same day under the current law if your natural death is deemed reasonably foreseeable, whatever that means. But if they say your natural death is not deemed reasonably foreseeable, so let's say you've got a chronic condition, you're a person with a disability, but you're not dying anytime soon, then they would give you a 90-day waiting period.
Yep.
Well, you know, what does that mean? So I'm not dying. I have a chronic condition. So let's say I have a significant disability. I might have, some degenerative back condition. I'm in a wheelchair, and now, and I say I'm in a lot of pain, and I might be in a lot of pain, but there's ways we can properly deal with that rather than abandoning them to death. So what they say is, well, it's your lucky day. We're going to approve you in 90 days. You can die, and you can get planning right now. We're going to go do it in 90 days. So that's what the new law says. The other thing it did is it said that if you were approved for euthanasia, but then you became incompetent. So there was this big hullabaloo about, what happens, because the old law required me to be able to consent at the time of death. That was the first law, said I had to be able to consent at the time of death. So what they were trying to say is we're going to try and avoid abuse by saying, Russ, you were approved for euthanasia. And then when we come to do it on Saturday morning, if Russ isn't capable of consenting anymore, so let's say you had a stroke or something, whatever happened, right? Now you're not capable of consenting. They couldn't go ahead and inject you. I'm not saying they didn't do it, because who would know different, honestly?
Mm-hmm. But this final consent.
But now they said the final consent is not necessary if you were already approved.
That's right. It's done.
Now,
it's gone.
Now, right off the bat, once you start removing the requirement of consent,
yep,
you're opening the door. So what is Canada debating right now? They're debating euthanasia for children.
Yes.
And euthanasia by advanced.
That's where I wanted to go next, Alex, because it seems like this euthanasia in Canada is such a great idea. It's so freeing when it comes to one's bodily autonomy that we need to expand the concept, because we're depriving the mentally ill and children of this great benefit here that is now our charter right. And so now we have the case where mentally ill and
yep.
I don't know how we're going to
Bill C7.
How do you take a look at a person and make a prognostication on his ability to change his mind or not down the road when he's mentally ill? I mean,
yeah. So let's be clear.
Like
Bill C7,
a blank check. This is like a blank check.
That's right. Bill C7 already expanded euthanasia to include mental illness alone, but then the government announced a 2-year moratorium based on the fact that they didn't have any rules around killing people who were mentally ill.
Yes.
So then they put up this commission. So the commission sent in a report. Now we don't have the final report of the parliamentary committee that's examining this question, but the commission came out and said that you don't need any special rules around this, that the Bill C7 said there'd be a 90-day waiting period. Let's think this through. Euthanasia for mental illness alone. So the Netherlands and Belgium do allow euthanasia for mental illness alone. That's correct.
Yes.
But then you have to look at their protocols. So I in no way support euthanasia whatsoever. But why Canada is becoming the most permissive nation in the world on euthanasia is because of our law is specifically designed to be permissive. Whereas the Netherlands and Belgium, they actually do have some type of control. So let me get into this. Both Netherlands and Belgium have protocols that say that if you are asking for euthanasia for mental illness alone, 2 things must be. You must wait minimally 1 year. So secondly, you must be willing to try all effective treatments.
Okay.
So what they're saying to you is you do not qualify for euthanasia unless you've tried all effective treatments. And if all effective treatments failed, then you could qualify. Now, I'm not saying this is a wonderful thing, but in Canada, our law does not require you to try effective treatment. Now, why is this important? We're allowing euthanasia right now for people with chronic conditions, and yet you do not have to try effective treatment. You could be dead in 90 days.
I think Canadian law stipulates that you only need to be briefed on possible.
Yeah, you only have to be told that alternatives may exist, and here's what they could be. They might be. In the same way as someone who's dying, let's say you are nearing death, you have cancer, and all you have to be is briefed on is that palliative care is an option to you. Okay, that's okay, fine. You say no, fine. Okay, euthanasia is the option. You see, so the whole thing is not meant to say we're first going to try treatment. And now we can't force you to accept treatment anyway. I'm in no way saying to you, Russ, you know, this treatment would be good for you or possibly good for you. You have to do it. No,
No.
I believe you have the right to say no to medical treatment. I have no question about that. That's not my issue. My issue is, though, that in the Netherlands and Belgium, if you ask for euthanasia for mental illness alone and you're not willing to try effective treatments, they'll say to you, well, then you don't qualify.
Yeah.
It's your choice. You don't have to accept treatments. We're not forcing it on you, but you must accept treatment in order to die by euthanasia. The second thing is, in the Netherlands and Belgium, you have to have a psychiatrist sign off. Now, I know that doesn't make too much difference because, if you look at Belgium, there's the one psychiatrist who does almost all the euthanasia deaths. She works for the euthanasia clinic in Belgium, and she's set on several studies and reports on what she's done, and they
Yeah.
look
Well.
pretty sick to me, actually. If you go through the data, you would say, you're pretty loosey-goosey on this, aren't you?
Well.
Nonetheless, she has followed the protocol. She's waited a year. She's made sure she's tried effective treatments with these people, and in the end, she signs them off and she lethally injects them. So when she says that we go through a long process in Belgium, well, there is a somewhat long process, whereas in Canada, as of this moment, now we haven't seen the final rules that Parliament is suggesting, but we are saying the committee that looked at it said, it was run by psychiatrists and people like that committee, they said that there's no need for any special rules. You already have a 90-day waiting period, etc., and that's what would be invoked in these cases.
Okay, that's absolutely incredible. And it seems like what's shaping up here is euthanasia has become maybe the authorities to be what they're doing. What they seem to be doing is playing off of people's fear of pain and suffering, and using that to build up the benefits of dying, of foregoing life and taking the better option, which is dying. And of course, when you die, there's no pain and suffering. And
I think it's philosophical, Russ. I think some people are just so into this concept of euthanasia. The other thing is the euthanasia doctors, they get heavily involved in euthanasia and they're justifying what they're doing. So once you've done a whole bunch of deaths, so you didn't go to medical school in order to be trained to lethally inject people. But once you start lethally injecting people, then you start thinking, oh, is this something
yeah,
that I was meant to do when I went to medical school? And you start, you justify it. So you expand it. You start thinking, oh, well, this is there's a good
it
to
sounds like
this.
it's become a preferred medical option. And
Yeah,
I see where things really once this mindset takes hold, we end up. I'm going to screen share here to this article. It's a Fox News article, and the world is picking
yep,
up on what's going on in Canada. And this one hit me hard because it talks about a Canadian soldier, one of my comrades in arms, a vet who suffered from PTSD, and boom, he goes to Veterans Affairs for a little bit of help, and he gets advised to, hey, consider euthanasia. It might be the way to solve all your problems.
yep,
So he didn't volunteer for
no.
any
And
information. He didn't ask for it.
that story was
It's
picked up by,
become a treatment. It's a treatment.
that's right. And you showed me the Fox News article, which is in the US. The Associated Press picked it up. There was an article by the Associated Press about it, what's going on in Canada and everything. And it's starting to go worldwide. There was an article in China, and I republished comments from this article in China. This Chinese newspaper asked the question, why is Canada euthanizing its poor? So this
I
is
saw that.
previous to the
Ah,
PTSD one.
oh,
And so he's saying, and what's his article about? He says, I support euthanasia. He's saying, but why is Canada euthanizing its poor? Well, what's happening is when you look at the deaths of people with disabilities, like the people with who had multiple chronic sensitivities, MCS, right?
yes.
Multiple. So what's happening is multiple chemical sensitivities. Sorry, multiple chemical sensitivities. And so what's happening is that they have an extreme condition where they react heavily to certain chemicals, certain smells, certain things around them. I actually have a bit of MCS myself. Like I can't handle certain things around me, and I don't want certain cleaning fluids to be used. Now I don't get this whole breakout thing. I just have a hard time breathing. Okay, so whatever. So I'm not saying I'm as
Well,
bad. I
Veterans
have
Affairs has a solution for you, Alex.
euthanasia. I know it's a
Yes.
bad joke. I know. Sadly, it's becoming something that, the bad joke is becoming the reality. This is the thing, Russ. I
Yeah.
hate to say it, but nonetheless, I can understand MCS. I can understand what they're going through. And here, these people have MCS, and they find themselves unable to work because they have such reactions to these things. Well, it's hard to go into society and work in an office, or let's say work in a factory, when you're reacting to everything and you're breaking out and you can't, and you're in pain and you have physical pain and you have all these things going on. But you see, then if they're not working, then what happens is they end up in social housing. Well, now you're in social housing. Well, guess what? You're in some big apartment building in Toronto or London, Ontario, or Ottawa somewhere, which is all under social housing, or let's say has partially covered by social housing. Well, you're living in a place you can't live in. Like, could you imagine if you're reacting heavily to the
Mhm.
marijuana smoke and you're in a building where a certain percentage of people are smoking marijuana at night?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't work. You can't live like that. So these people are saying, I couldn't leave my bedroom. So because of that, I was approved for euthanasia and I died by euthanasia. So it was the first woman, was 51 years old, died by euthanasia. Okay. Well, what about then there was another one. She was 31 years old, and the MCS people raised money on a GoFundMe page, and they raised enough money to find her a place to live. Because what's the treatment for MCS? A clean place to live.
Mm.
That's the treatment for MCS, a place that they're not reacting to, where they're in their own home. Even if it's a tiny home, it doesn't matter. It's their own home that is not filled with chemicals that they're reacting to, or smells, or things that they can't breathe. Well, what about the people who have disabilities? There's a woman in Victoria, BC, and there was an article published about her, and I ended up contacting her through Twitter. And she wants euthanasia, not because she wants euthanasia at all. She's been trying to get treatment for her condition. She has a degenerative condition, so she has a lot of pain, significant pain. But she knows she's not going to get better. That's not what she's looking for. She's looking for pain and symptom management. So the one surgery she needs is she has her spine is degenerated, so therefore it's constantly in pain. She needs it to be, I don't know if they use a metal rod anymore or what they use today, but she needs surgery in order to give her back stability, because this movement is causing her to be in pain all the time. She says, I can't
Okay.
live like this. I
Okay.
can't live in pain like this. But she can't get the surgery. She's and there's other things too that she has symptoms for. She says, my symptoms are treatable. I can live a good quality of life, but I can't get the medical treatment. But they approve me for euthanasia nice and quick. She says, "Oh,
Okay.
that wasn't a problem getting approved for MAID. Oh yeah, I got approved for that without a
No,
problem."
it seems to be the option, the preferred option. And I don't know if you know Angelina Ireland. She is the
I do know Angelina.
CEO
Yep.
and president of Delta Hospice Society, I believe. I had her uh, in a hot interview just under a year ago, and she was saying she was trying her best, her hardest, to keep palliative care as an option in her part of the world, in British Columbia, and she was finding it very difficult because you could not have palliative care unless you offered euthanasia services
Right.
as a parallel option
Right.
to
Because
be
the
pursued.
government was saying, if we're going to give you money to care for people as they're dying, then you
Exactly.
must also, if you're willing to take our money, you must also be willing to kill people.
Yes.
And the Delta Hospice Society said, but we're not going to kill anybody. We're not going to do that.
Yes.
And the crazy thing about that story is, and you did the interview, and I know Angelina too. The crazy thing about it is the Delta Hospice Society wasn't complicit with euthanasia, but they weren't telling people you can't have euthanasia because the hospital was right across the street.
Yes.
They were saying to people, if you absolutely want euthanasia, they had a couple of patients while Angelina and their team were running the hospice itself, the 10-bed hospice, who demanded euthanasia, so they transferred them over to the hospital, which was right across the street. It's not like it was transferring them like,
Yeah.
20 minutes or
Actually,
something.
give him a drive, give him a ride. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they died by euthanasia. It's not that they were being complicit in it, because they didn't want those people to die by euthanasia. But if that's what you were demanding, that's your legal right, whether she liked it or not. So that's what they did. They weren't denying anybody anything. They were just saying, here, hospice is different. We're not about to kill you. We will care for your pain and symptom management, and you can die a natural death with true death with dignity. That's what they were offering. And the fact of it is, the government was saying, no, you must offer killing as an option. The problem with mixing killing with caring is the caring element in the end gets lost.
Yes, obviously, in that case, it certainly did. Now, getting back to the charter, I think what we're talking about here is we're saying that people who have disabilities are very likely not to be able to support themselves the way they would like. And we have a case, it looks like we have a building case here for discrimination under the charter, because
Clearly.
these people don't have the wherewithal to have the same access to palliative care, for example, even if they want to go the route of palliative care and
Well, I'm not sure if
symptom-free.
palliative care is so much the issue with them. I think the issue is that we also have a healthcare system in crisis. So you've got that mixture. You have a
Yes,
situation where a lot of people with disabilities, through no fault of their own,
yes.
are living also in poverty. And
You're
so
right. It's not about
reality.
palliative. It's right now. It's not about palliative care at all, because you don't have to be close to dying anymore
No.
with our new legislation. It's just, you're suffering.
So you have this type of abandonment going on in the culture where they're not receiving the care that they need to live. And so it's becoming a situation where they feel, because they can apply for MAID and they can get approved for MAID almost immediately. That's not they're not having any difficulty with that, because
No,
according
not
to
at
the
all.
rules, they qualify. So the question is, well, is this therefore you are going to kill me by lethal injection, but you're not going to provide me the care so I can live? What this is discrimination. This is clearly discrimination. So someone like myself, who at least I'm gainfully employed, at least I
Talk
have
about
some resources, I'm in a different situation now. If I had significant disabilities, it might be very different. But let me tell you about the system also. I mentioned earlier, we have a son with a disability. The fact of it is if my son did not have his mother as an advocate for him all the time, it would be very difficult. You have to think about the hoops you have to jump through for all these things, like for the government funding for things, whatever it might be, for whatever you need. They have to go through all these hoops. The system is not designed to be easy for somebody with disabilities to attain these supports that exist within the system. The other thing is attaining supports in the system when they are now all technically this exists for you. Let's get to the story of Roger Foley. Roger Foley is here in London, Ontario. Roger Foley had a degenerative condition to the point where he needed 24-hour care. All he was asking for is for a program that already exists in Ontario, which is self-directed care, meaning that he would hire his caregivers. The government would provide him the funding. He would hire his caregivers and he could fire his caregivers. But by being in control of his caregivers and his fear, which is what he was experiencing before, the reason he ended up in the hospital the first time is two things happened. The first thing happened was his one caregiver had fed him food which had gone bad. So he got severely sick and ended up in the hospital. And he's like, well, you're not going to give me self-directed care. So the person coming in, I don't know them from Adam. They're hired by whatever government agency has sent them in. And they had the audacity to feed me food that is going to kill me. That's insane. And he says, I need someone who I am working with, who I know, who I trust is going to care for me properly. Another thing is, one of his caregivers left his stove on. He had a gas stove, left it on. He says, I'm not physically capable of getting up out of my bed to turn off my gas stove. I can't do it. So he says, do you want to gas me to death? Like, just allow me to have self-directed care. And he was denied that. So here he's in the hospital, and he said, I refuse to leave the hospital until the government gives me self-directed care. And what happened at the hospital then says, oh, well, you have two choices. You can pay us $1,500 a day, stay here.
Yep.
Of course, he doesn't have $1,500 a day.
Yep.
Or you can have MAID.
Yep.
Now, they weren't talking about a maid coming in and cleaning things up for him and keeping things nice around there. No, they were talking about killing him. And he's like, what? You're going to give me two choices. I can have MAID, you're killing me, or I could pay you $1,500 a day.
This sounds like a money issue more than anything. It doesn't sound like a life issue.
It's insanity. And if you think about his condition, well, I know it costs money, but nonetheless, like someone would say, yeah, Roger Foley is going to bankrupt our system. No, he's not. But for him in that situation, how else was he supposed to live? Tell me, how else is he supposed to live? So we're going to say, oh, well, killing's the better option, Roger. So maybe you should do us all a favor and be dead.
So here's
it's about choice and autonomy, Russ. It's about choice and autonomy.
Yeah,
Freedom.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Alex, but it seems to me that the slippery slope is we've gone from right to life to right to die, and now
Yep.
a duty to die. So we've
It's
gone down that slope all the way down to, do society a favor and off yourself because we got to protect and save the medical system. Wow,
well,
that's a slippery slope.
just last week, an article was published by Fact Check,
Oh boy.
and it says Canada is not killing poor people. And the article says that because the Canada's MAID law does not approve MAID based on poverty, so poverty is not a reason.
It's not mentioned. No.
No, it's not mentioned in law. Well, that's true. But
Well,
sorry about my French. What the heck does that have to do with the reason people are asking for MAID? They're going
yes.
through disabilities, or they have a chronic health condition, and they're also living in poverty. And you read these articles that are coming out from different places all over the place. So what are they saying? The reason I'm actually asking for euthanasia is not because, like the woman who was featured in this one article who has long COVID. So she got COVID, and so her symptoms have continued. She says, I have been unable to work, and now I'm in a situation where I'm absolutely broke, and I'm probably gonna lose my apartment in a couple of months. My only hope is MAID.
Hmm.
And
My
she's
only
saying, I
hope.
don't want to die, actually. I've got no interest in dying. She's saying it right in the
No.
article. I've got no interest in dying. I
Yes.
want to live, but there's no way for me to continue living this way.
Wow.
Well, excuse me, that's MAID for poverty.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Exactly.
The law didn't say MAID for poverty. She's got long COVID, but because of her chronic condition, she'd qualify for MAID. Therefore, ABC, it's euthanasia for poverty is what it is.
Yeah. Back to our premise that we're talking about discrimination under the charter. Poor people.
And then we have doctor
get a
shopping
bad
on
break.
top of it, Russ. The article, the woman in Ottawa who died earlier this month in Brampton. So she was told by 3 doctors in Ottawa she does not qualify for MAID. Now,
Okay.
she also had a chronic condition. So she contacted the Dying with Dignity group in Toronto, and they referred to her to a doctor who was doing euthanasias, a lot of them in Brampton. And
Oh.
that doctor approved her for euthanasia. So she just needed to get herself to Brampton so she could die by lethal injection. Now, excuse me, 3 doctors said you don't qualify.
Mm-hmm.
One doctor who's done a whole bunch of deaths says, come on down to Brampton and I'll kill you.
Wow.
It stops
Wow.
it stops making sense, Now, did the doctor in Brampton know this woman? No, didn't know her at all. Only knew that she wanted to die by MAID, and here's her health condition. I've approved her. Now, let me give you one other thing. We better get moving to wrap this up, how bad these things are. From the very beginning, the law was designed to expand. I also said the law did not protect you from the very beginning. So what does the law say? The law said that the doctor had to do A, B, C, D, and E to approve you. And then it said the doctor only had to be under the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. So that's under the original law. The doctor only had to be of the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. So when you look at the Alan Nichols case, he died in Chilliwack, BC. He wasn't sick at all, but he did have deep depression. He was demanding death by euthanasia. And when finally the RCMP, who were pushed did their investigation, they said the law was followed. Well, the doctor only had to be of the opinion Alan Nichols fit the criteria of the law. So obviously speaking, there was no way you could prosecute someone for doing something which would be considered technically illegal. Secondly, then Bill C7 expanded things to chronic conditions, etc. So now you have the widening. But thirdly, the law from the beginning was designed as, I have to watch my language because this might be a family show. So anyway, it was not designed to protect anybody, because what happened is the law is designed that Dr. A approves you for euthanasia, or nurse practitioner A. Dr. B signs off. Dr. A then comes in and lethally injects you, and then Dr. A sends in the report to the government. So it's a self-reporting system. So if Russ were a doctor, he could approve you for euthanasia. He could get his friend Joe to sign off, or Joanne to sign off. Yep. He could lethally inject you. He sends in the report to the government. Now, when you're speeding down the highway at some crazy speed, are you calling the police to come pick you up because you broke the law? No. Self-reporting system means that if you did something questionable, no one will ever know. No one will ever know. And then the reporting system in Canada is designed to cover up anyway, because what is it actually seeking? All it seeks is your age that you died at, what medical condition you had. The doctor who killed you is the one filling out the report. So obviously you had cancer or you had whatever. He's saying you got this condition. Like, obviously speaking, there's nothing there to tell you that we've got a problem, and it's designed that you'll never find a problem.
Well, it sounds like a pretty poor design, but
And we're talking about life and death. We're talking about life and death.
Designs that are that poor are usually planned and deliberate, in my experience. But one last question before we wrap up, and I know you got to go, and that is, in all of this, what happens to the doctors that don't go along with this this new culture, this new legislation? What happens to them?
Well, it depends on what province you're in. So if you're in Manitoba, you're completely protected. Manitoba, the legislature passed a bill which gave doctors conscience rights. So Manitoba is the only province in Canada where a doctor can say, "Sorry, Russ,
Wow, I thought conscience rights. I thought that was covered by the
killing
charter.
you. Yeah, I'm not. I don't like conscience is in the charter. You're absolutely right. But you see, conscience has been now defined by other legal decisions as a limited right, which is stupid because my conscience and my freedom of religion and all these things are considered key charter rights, but of course they're now being interpreted differently. Nonetheless, Manitoba is the only place. In Ontario, we've got something called effective referral. So that means that if you come to a doctor, Russ, who says, I want nothing to do with euthanasia, Russ, I did not go to medical school to give you a lethal injection. Didn't do that. I'm not having anything to do with it. But the law now, not the law, but the College of Physicians and Surgeons require that physician to send you to the killer, not just to refer you to somebody else.
Okay.
Now, in normal referral situations, a doctor could say, well, you know, Russ, you're asking for something that I'm not comfortable with. So therefore, you know, here's a list of 10 doctors who I hear are willing to take patients, and I'm happy to transfer your medical records, but I can't. Obviously, we're not able to be together because, you know, we don't share the same philosophies. So I'm not going to in any way stop you from doing what you're going to do. That's one way of referral. But what Ontario says, no, that's the Ontario College of Physicians says, well, I must do an effective referral. So that means I must send you to someone who will facilitate your death.
Okay.
So that's what it is. And, you know, the doctors who don't believe in killing, guess what? They say, well, I can't send you to the killer either, because isn't that the same thing? So, you know, usually we're not to talk about what happened in Nazi Germany. And I don't like to bring that up. But, you know, a lot of people say, well, how come all those German people were complicit in sending the Jewish people on the trains, knowing that they were going to go to these death camps? They were going to go to these work camps, death camps. Certainly, the odds of them surviving it were almost nil to none, or very little. Of course, some people did survive. You know, thank God some did survive. Nonetheless, how could all these German people be complicit? And yet you're telling doctors today who believe it's wrong to kill, you must send them to the killer.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a pretty somber note to close on, Alex. This has been an eye-opening discussion.
We need caring for people. We need caring for people, not killing them. We must recognize what it means to be human, Russ. We all go through difficult times. There's nothing abnormal about going through a difficult time. We all go through times in our life where maybe we even question our wish to continue living. Not some of us go through deeper times than others, emotionally, psychologically, and we're all made up differently as humans, but nonetheless, we all share in common the fear of having a bad death. We do. We all recognize we can all go through deep depression. We all recognize we can each experience psychological downtimes in our life where we might experience some suicidal ideation. Lots of people have gone through that. It's not new. And now you have a law that says, well, when you're experiencing that, the doctor can kill you. And this is supposed to be about freedom, choice, and autonomy. It's all a lie. It's a flag they wave in order to promote death, because there are certain people who philosophically think this is a good thing. And in fact,
maybe it's more about a culture of death than it is about helping one human helping another human.
Well, it's certainly not about helping. It's not about caring.
Well,
killing
Alex,
is not caring. Killing is abandonment, Russ. It's abandonment. We abandon people to death.
I got to thank you once again, Alex. This has been a tremendous discussion. I know our C3RF members will really enjoy it and take it to heart.
People can find me at the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition.
Yes.
I'm easy to find. I'm easy to Google. And if you want to go to my blog, which is the world's #1 source of information on these questions. You just click on my face on the website, or you Google EPC blog, and it comes up.
Okay.
Thank you, Russ.
You bet. Thanks again.